When Clara Vance stepped out of the shadows with a bruised face and a desperate whisper, she didn't ask Rhett Calder to save her, she asked him to kill for her. Within the hour, they were married. Within 2 hours, they were running for their lives through freezing mountains, hunted by men who wanted more than just her. What began as a cold transaction in a dying saloon became a war over land worth a fortune, and a fight that would either forge them into something unbreakable or destroy them both. Stay until the end. Like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The doors didn't swing open. They slammed. The sound cut through the saloon like a gunshot, silencing the card game in the corner and stopping the piano player mid-chord. Every head turned. The man who filled the doorway wasn't just tall. He was a wall of muscle and weather-beaten leather, shoulders so wide he had to angle sideways to clear the frame. Snow dusted his dark coat and clung to the brim of his hat. His beard was thick, untrimmed, streaked with ice. His eyes were the color of winter storms. Rhett Calder scanned the room with the kind of calm that made nervous men reach for their guns and then think better of it. He walked to the bar, boots heavy on the warped floorboards, and dropped a leather pouch onto the counter. It landed with a solid thunk that every soul in the room recognized. Gold. The bartender, a wiry man named Silas with more scars than teeth, eyed the pouch but didn't reach for it. "What's your business?" Silas asked. Rhett pulled off his gloves, one finger at a time. "I need a wife." The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then someone in the back let out a bark of laughter. Another joined in. Within moments, the whole saloon was roaring. "A wife!" one man wheezed, slapping the table. "Hell, Calder, you planning to drag some poor woman up that mountain and freeze her to death?" "Better get two," another shouted. "First one won't last the winter." Rhett didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just stood there, waiting for the noise to die down like he had all the time in the world. Silas cleared his throat. "You serious?" "By sunrise," Rhett said. "I need a woman willing to marry me and leave tonight. She gets half that gold now, the other half when we reach my land." "Your land," Silas repeated slowly. "You mean that frozen stretch of nothing up past Widow's Peak?" "That's the one." "Calder, there ain't nothing up there but rock and snow. Why the hell would you need a wife for that?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "That's my business." The laughter had faded now, replaced by uncomfortable shuffling and sidelong glances, the kind of silence that meant people were starting to realize this wasn't a joke. "No woman in her right mind's going to take that deal," Silas said. "Then I'll take one not in her right mind." A chair scraped in the corner. Every eye turned. She rose from the shadows near the back wall, where the lamplight didn't quite reach. At first, all they saw was a silhouette, a woman in a dark dress, thin, unsteady on her feet. Then she stepped into the light. Her face told a story that made even the hardest men in the room look away. The bruise along her left cheekbone was fresh, purple-black and swollen. Her lip was split. There were older marks, too, faded yellow shadows under her jaw, the ghost of fingerprints on her throat. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, but strands had come loose and hung around her face. Her dress was plain, patched in places, the kind of thing a woman wore when she'd sold everything else. But it was her eyes that held the room. Dark, sharp, burning with something that wasn't quite desperation and wasn't quite rage. Something in between. Clara Vance. Half the men knew her name. The other half knew her story. Everyone knew she was running out of time. She walked toward Rhett with her chin up, her hands steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. She stopped 3 feet from him and looked him dead in the eye. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Rhett studied her for a long moment, the bruises, the thinness of her wrists, the way she held herself like a drawn bowstring. "You know what you're agreeing to?" he asked. "Better than you do. I leave at midnight. No belongings, no goodbyes. We ride until we're clear of the valley, and we don't stop unless we're forced to. It's 2 days hard travel in the cold, maybe 3 if the weather turns. You fall behind, I'm not waiting." "I won't fall behind." Rhett's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced over her shoulder at the door, then back at him. When she spoke again, her voice dropped low enough that only he could hear. "Because if I'm still here by morning, I'm dead." The bartender leaned in. "Clara, you sure about this? Calder's not exactly—" "I'm sure." She didn't look at Silas. She didn't look at anyone but Rhett. But I need something more than gold. Rhett raised an eyebrow. What? She took a breath, her hands curled into fists at her sides. I need you to kill the men hunting me. The saloon went dead silent. Rhett didn't move, didn't flinch. He just watched her, expression unreadable. How many? He asked. 4? Maybe 5 if they hired extra help. Who are they? Enforcers working for Victor Gaines. A ripple of recognition went through the room. Victor Gaines, land baron, railroad man, the kind of man who bought politicians and buried anyone who got in his way. He'd been tightening his grip on the territory for years, swallowing up homesteads and mining claims like a snake swallowing rats. Why's Gaines after you? Rhett asked. Clara's jaw tightened. My father owed him money. When my father died, Gaines said the debt transferred to me. He gave me a choice. Work it off in his house, or he'd take payment another way. And you ran. I tried. Her voice cracked, just barely. But he's not the kind of man who lets people run. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the pouch of gold, untied it, and poured half the coins onto the bar. They clinked and rolled, catching the lamplight. You get this now, he said. The other half when we're clear. But I don't kill for hire. Clara's face fell. However, Rhett continued, if someone tries to take what's mine, I deal with it. You marry me, you're mine. That means anyone coming for you is coming for me, and I don't let people take what's mine. She stared at him, searching his face for a lie. She didn't find one. So we have a deal? She asked. Rhett extended his hand. We have a deal. Her hand was small in his, cold and rough-skinned. They shook once, firm. We'll need a preacher, Rhett said. Silas laughed, but it was a nervous sound. You're really doing this? I said sunrise. I meant it. Rhett glanced at Clara. You got anything you need to collect? She shook her head. Everything I own, I'm wearing. Good. Makes it easier. There's a circuit preacher staying at the boarding house, one of the card players offered. Reverend Michaels. He's half drunk most nights, but he's legal. Get him, Rhett said. The man scrambled out the door. The next 20 minutes passed in a strange, suspended silence. Clara sat at the bar, untouched whiskey in front of her. Rhett stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the street through the frost-etched window. Every few seconds, Clara's hand would drift to her ribs, pressing lightly like she was checking for broken bones. She'd wince and pull her hand away. The door opened. A thin man in a rumpled coat stumbled in, eyes bleary, smelling like cheap rye. Reverend Michaels. He blinked at the room, confused. Someone said there's a wedding? That's right, Rhett said. Make it quick. The Reverend squinted at Clara, then at Rhett, then back at Clara. You sure about this, miss? Just do it, Clara said. Michaels sighed and pulled a battered Bible from his coat. All right, stand together. They stood facing each other in the middle of the saloon floor, surrounded by a half-circle of witnesses who looked like they were watching a hanging. Michaels mumbled through the vows, skipping half the words, rushing through the ceremony like he had somewhere better to be. Do you take this woman? I do. Do you take this man? Clara hesitated, just for a second. Then she lifted her chin. I do. Then by the power vested in me by somebody, I now pronounce you man and wife. You can kiss if you want. Or not. I don't care. Rhett didn't kiss her. Neither of them moved. It's done, Rhett said. He turned to Silas. You got paper? Silas slid a marriage certificate across the bar. Rhett signed it in quick, sharp strokes. Clara signed beneath him, her handwriting smaller, shakier. The Reverend scrawled his name as witness. It was official. Clara Vance was now Clara Calder. Rhett pocketed the certificate and handed Clara a heavy coat from the hook by the door. Put this on. We're leaving. She pulled it on. It was too big, but it was warm. Wait, Silas said. He was staring out the window, face pale. Rhett, you got company. Everyone turned. Through the frost-covered glass, they could see 4 men on horseback, riding down the main street. Even from a distance, their intent was clear. They weren't stopping for a drink. That's them, Clara whispered. Her voice shook. That's Gaines' men. Rhett didn't look surprised. He just sighed, like this was an inconvenience he'd expected. "Stay here," he told Clara. "Rhett, stay here." He walked out into the street. The cold hit him like a fist, but he didn't react. He stopped in the middle of the road, hands loose at his sides, and waited. The four riders slowed as they approached. The one in front was broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and a badge pinned to his coat, a private enforcer's badge, the kind Gaines handed out to men who did his dirty work. His name was Decker, and he had a reputation for enjoying his job a little too much. "Calder," Decker said, reining in his horse. "Didn't expect to see you in town. Didn't expect to be here long." Decker's eyes flicked to the saloon, then back to Rhett. "We're looking for a woman, Clara Vance. Someone said she came in here." "She did." Decker smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Then you won't mind if we collect her?" "I would, actually." The smile faded. "This isn't your business, Calder." "It is now." Rhett pulled the marriage certificate from his coat and held it up. "Clara Vance is Clara Calder now, my wife. And you're not taking her." Decker stared at the paper, then let out a short, ugly laugh. "You married her? You actually married that little—" "Careful," Rhett said quietly. The temperature in the street seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Decker's hand drifted toward his gun. The three men behind him shifted in their saddles, ready. "Gaines owns her debt," Decker said. "That means he owns her. A piece of paper doesn't change that." "You're wrong. You really want to die over some broken woman you just met?" Rhett took a step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Decker's horse sidestep nervously. "I'm going to say this once," Rhett said. "Turn around, ride back to Gaines, tell him his claim is void. She's my wife now, and if he wants her, he'll have to go through me." Big talk from one man. "Then try me." For a long frozen moment, nobody moved. Then Decker's hand dropped to his gun. He was fast. Faster than most. But Rhett was faster. Rhett's hand snapped out and grabbed Decker's wrist before the gun cleared the holster. He yanked hard, dragging Decker off his horse and slamming him into the frozen ground. The enforcer's gun skittered away. Before Decker could react, Rhett's boot came down on his chest, pinning him. The other three went for their weapons. Rhett drew. The sound of the hammer cocking was loud in the cold air. His revolver was aimed at the nearest rider's head. "Don't," Rhett said. They froze. "Next man who moves gets buried tonight," Rhett continued. His voice was calm, matter of fact. "You want to test me? Go ahead. But you'll be dead before you hit the ground." The riders exchanged glances. Slowly, carefully, they raised their hands. Rhett looked down at Decker, who was gasping for air under his boot. "You listening?" Rhett asked. Decker nodded, eyes wide. "Good. Here's the message you're going to take back to Victor Gaines. Clara Calder is off limits. She's under my protection now. If he sends men after her again, I won't just send them back. I'll send them back in pieces. And then I'll come for him. You understand?" "Yes," Decker wheezed. Rhett lifted his boot. Decker scrambled to his feet, clutching his ribs. "Get out of my sight," Rhett said. Decker stumbled to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, and wheeled around. The other three followed. Within seconds, they were galloping out of town, disappearing into the darkness. Rhett holstered his gun and walked back into the saloon. Clara was standing by the bar, white-knuckled, staring at him. "Did you just—" "Yeah. They'll come back. I know. With more men. Probably." She looked at him like he was insane. "Then why— "Because you're my wife now," Rhett said simply. "And I keep my word. Now get your coat. We're leaving." He didn't wait for her to respond. He just walked past her, grabbed his saddlebag, and headed for the door. Clara stood there for a moment, shaking. Then she grabbed the coat and followed. Outside, Rhett's horse was a massive black gelding built for endurance and mountain travel. He swung into the saddle and extended his hand to Clara. She took it. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. "Hold on," he said. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and he spurred the horse forward. They rode out of town at a gallop, hooves pounding against the frozen dirt. Behind them, the lights of the saloon faded into the darkness. Ahead, the mountains loomed like the edge of the world. Clara pressed her face against Rhett's back, feeling the cold wind tear at her skin. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't know if she'd made the right choice. But for the first time in months, she wasn't waiting to be caught. She was running, and this time she wasn't running alone. Tito. The first hour was silent except for the sound of the horse's breathing and the crunch of snow under its hooves. They climbed steadily, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. Clara's arms ached from holding on. Her face was numb, but she didn't let go. "How far?" she finally asked, her voice muffled against his coat. 2 days if we're lucky, Rhett said. 3 if the snow gets worse. And if they follow us? They will. Then what? Then we deal with it. She wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told her he wouldn't answer, so she stayed quiet and focused on not falling off the horse. They rode through the night, stopping only once to let the horse drink from a half-frozen stream. Rhett dismounted and checked the trail behind them, eyes scanning the darkness. "See anything?" Clara asked. "Not yet. But they're coming." "Yeah." He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and handed it to her. She drank, the water so cold it hurt her teeth. "Why did you really come to town?" she asked. Rhett glanced at her. "I told you, I needed a wife." Nobody rides into a town in the middle of winter and offers gold for a wife unless they're desperate. So what is it? You in trouble? No? Then why? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I've got 160 acres up in the high valley," he said. "Good land, water, timber. Problem is, there's a law that says a man can't file a permanent claim on land that size unless he's married. Otherwise, the government can auction it off to the highest bidder." Clara frowned. "So this was about keeping your land?" "Yeah." "And you couldn't just find a woman the normal way?" Rhett gave her a flat look. "You ever been to my valley?" "No. It's cold. Isolated, no town for miles. Most women take one look and decide they'd rather live anywhere else. I don't blame them. But I wasn't going to lose the land because I couldn't find someone willing to freeze with me. So you bought me." "I made a deal with you," Rhett corrected. "There's a difference." "Not much of one." "Maybe not. But you're alive, aren't you?" She didn't have an answer for that. They remounted and kept riding. By the time the sun began to rise, they were deep in the mountains. The trail had narrowed to a treacherous path carved into the side of a cliff, with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. Snow had started to fall again, thick and heavy. Clara's whole body ached. Her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. But she didn't complain. "There's a cave up ahead," Rhett said. "We'll stop there, rest the horse, eat something." "How much farther after that?" "Another day. Maybe more." The cave was shallow but dry, tucked into the mountainside and hidden behind a curtain of ice-covered pine branches. Rhett led the horse inside and tied it to a rock outcropping. Then he pulled out a bedroll and tossed it to Clara. "Get warm," he said. "I'll keep watch." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She wrapped herself in the bedroll and sank down against the cave wall, shivering. Rhett sat near the entrance, rifle across his lap, staring out at the falling snow. "You think they're still following?" Clara asked. "Yeah." "How do you know?" "Because if I were them, I wouldn't stop." She pulled the bedroll tighter around her shoulders. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone crueler, maybe? Meaner?" Rhett glanced at her. "Give it time." She almost smiled. Almost. "Why did you really help me?" she asked quietly. "I told you." "No. Not the land." "Why did you agree to kill for me? You could have just married me and left it at that." Rhett was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted," he said. "And I know what it's like to have nowhere to run." Clara studied his face, looking for more, but he didn't offer it. They sat in silence as the snow continued to fall, and somewhere behind them, in the darkness, hoofbeats echoed through the mountains. Clara woke to the sound of Rhett kicking snow over the remains of a small fire she hadn't even known he'd built. Her body screamed in protest as she sat up, every muscle stiff, every joint aching from the cold and the hours clinging to the back of a horse. The cave was gray with early morning light, and the snow had stopped falling. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice rough. 3 hours, maybe 4. Rhett didn't look at her. He was already packing, movements efficient and practiced. We need to move. Did you sleep at all? No. Rhett, I said we need to move. She bit back whatever she'd been about to say and struggled to her feet, folding the bedroll with numb fingers. Her whole body felt like it had been beaten with rocks. When she handed the bedroll back to Rhett, their fingers brushed, and she realized his hands were just as cold as hers. He'd given her the only warm covering and sat watch all night in the freezing cave. She opened her mouth to say something, but he was already walking toward the horse, so she followed. Outside, the world was blinding white. Fresh snow had buried the trail, smoothing over their tracks from the night before. For a moment, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they'd lost their pursuers in the storm. Then she saw Rhett's face. "What is it?" she asked. He was staring down the mountain, jaw tight. "They're closer than I thought." "How do you know?" "Because I can see their smoke." He pointed. Far below, barely visible through the trees, a thin column of gray smoke rose into the morning sky. Clara's stomach dropped. "How far?" 3 miles, maybe less." He swung into the saddle and pulled her up behind him. "They camped for the night. Probably figured we'd do the same. We've got maybe an hour before they realize we kept moving." The horse lurched forward, and Clara grabbed onto Rhett's coat to keep from sliding off. They climbed higher, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. In some places, the path was so narrow that Clara could see straight down the mountainside, a drop that would kill them both if the horse slipped. She tried not to look. "Tell me about Gaines," Rhett said suddenly. Clara blinked. "What?" "Victor Gaines. Tell me what I'm dealing with." She hesitated. Talking about Gaines felt like summoning him, like saying his name would make him appear on the trail behind them. But Rhett was right. He needed to know. "He showed up in the valley about 5 years ago," she said. "Bought land, started a timber operation. Then he got into mining, railroads, cattle. Now he owns half the territory, and he's working on the other half." "How'd your father get mixed up with him?" Clara's throat tightened. "My father was a gambler, a bad one. He borrowed money from Gaines to cover his debts, thinking he'd win it back. He didn't. The debt kept growing, and Gaines kept adding interest. By the time my father died, we owed more than we could ever pay. And Gaines decided to collect from you. He said I had 2 options. Work in his house as—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Or he'd sell the debt to someone else. Someone worse." Rhett's shoulders tensed. "So you ran." "I tried. But Gaines has men everywhere. Every time I got close to the border, they found me. Dragged me back. The last time, Decker—" She touched her bruised cheek without thinking. "He said if I ran again, he'd make sure I couldn't run anymore." "But you did anyway." "Because staying meant dying slowly. Running meant maybe dying fast. I chose fast." Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not going to die. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact, delivered in the same tone he might use to say the sky was blue or the snow was cold." Clara wanted to believe him. She really did. But she'd learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't make it true. They rode in silence for another hour, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, harder to breathe. The wind picked up, howling through the rocks and cutting through Clara's borrowed coat like it wasn't even there. She pressed closer to Rhett's back, trying to steal whatever warmth she could. "There," Rhett said suddenly. Clara looked up. Ahead, the trail opened into a wide plateau, flat and exposed. On the far side, the mountains rose again, even steeper than before. "That's the pass," Rhett said. "Once we're through, we're on my land. Another few hours after that, we'll be at the cabin. And if they catch us before we reach the pass, then we fight." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one he had. They crossed the plateau at a gallop, the horse's hooves kicking up sprays of snow. Clara kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see riders cresting the trail behind them, but the mountainside stayed empty. They were halfway across when the first shot rang out. The bullet hit the snow 3 feet to their left, sending up a puff of white powder. Rhett yanked the reins hard, and the horse veered right, nearly throwing Clara off. "Stay low!" Rhett shouted. Another shot, this one closer. Clara twisted around and saw them, 4 riders, maybe 5, pouring out of the trees at the far end of the plateau. Too far for a clean shot, but close enough to close the distance fast. "Hold on!" Rhett kicked the horse into a dead run. The world became a blur of white and motion. Wind roared in Clara's ears. Her hands ached from gripping Rhett's coat. The riders behind them were shouting now, their voices barely audible over the pounding of hooves. Another gunshot. The bullet whined past Clara's head, so close she felt the air move. "Rhett!" "I know." They hit the far side of the plateau and plunged into the trees. Branches whipped at Clara's face and arms. The trail disappeared, replaced by a chaotic maze of rocks and fallen timber. Rhett guided the horse through it like he'd ridden this path 1,000 times, dodging obstacles Clara didn't even see until they were past them. Behind them, the riders crashed into the trees, slowed by the terrain, but still coming. "How much farther to the pass?" Clara yelled. "Too far." "What do we do?" Rhett didn't answer. He just kept riding, pushing the horse harder than Clara thought possible. The animal's breath came in ragged gasps, foam flecking its mouth. It was running on pure adrenaline now, the same as them. The trees began to thin. Ahead, Clara could see the pass, a narrow gap between two towering rock faces, steep and treacherous but passable. They were going to make it. Then the horse stumbled. It wasn't a bad stumble, just a misstep on a patch of ice, but it was enough to slow them down, enough for the riders to close the gap. "Rhett, they're right behind us." He pulled the horse to a stop so suddenly that Clara nearly flew over his shoulder. Before she could ask what he was doing, he shoved the reins into her hands. "Ride for the pass," he said. "Don't stop, don't look back." "What? No." "Do it, Clara." He swung down from the saddle, pulling his rifle as he moved. Clara stared at him, frozen. "Go!" he roared. She kicked the horse forward. It bolted, carrying her toward the pass while Rhett turned to face the riders alone. Clara made it 20 feet before she yanked the reins and brought the horse to a stop. She couldn't do it. She couldn't just leave him. She turned the horse around. Rhett had taken cover behind a fallen tree, rifle braced against his shoulder. The riders were spreading out, trying to flank him. There were 5 of them, Decker and 4 others, all armed, all moving with the confidence of men who thought they'd already won. "Give us the woman, Calder," Decker shouted. "We don't want you. Just her." Rhett didn't answer. He just fired. The shot took one of the riders clean out of his saddle. The man hit the ground and didn't move. The others scattered, diving for cover. "You're a dead man, Calder," Decker screamed. "Then come prove it." Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the trees, splintering bark and kicking up snow. Rhett moved like a ghost, rolling from one piece of cover to the next, firing, reloading, firing again. Another rider went down, clutching his shoulder and screaming, but there were still 3 left, and they were closing in. Clara's hands shook as she fumbled with the rifle strapped to the saddle. She'd never fired a gun in her life. Her father had never taught her. She'd never needed to know. Until now. She pulled the rifle free, nearly dropping it. It was heavier than she expected, cold and awkward in her hands. She didn't know how to aim, didn't know how to load it, didn't know anything except that Rhett was going to die if she didn't do something. One of the riders broke from cover, circling wide to get a clear shot at Rhett's back. Clara raised the rifle. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it steady. She tried to remember anything, any scrap of knowledge about how this was supposed to work. Point, breathe, squeeze. She pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her off the horse. The shot went wide, missing the rider by a good 10 feet. But it was loud, and it was close enough to make him wheel his horse around in surprise. He saw her. His eyes widened. Then Rhett's bullet took him in the chest. The rider toppled backward, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Rhett turned and locked eyes with Clara. Even from a distance, she could see the fury on his face. "I told you to run," he shouted. "I'm not leaving you." "Damn it, Clara!" Another burst of gunfire cut him off. Decker and the last rider were advancing, using the trees for cover. Rhett fired back, but his rifle clicked empty. He was out of ammunition. Decker grinned, stepping into the open with his gun raised. "End of the line, Calder." Rhett's hand dropped to his belt. In one smooth motion, he pulled a knife, a massive hunting blade with a worn handle, and hurled it. The knife buried itself in the last rider's throat. The man made a horrible gurgling sound and collapsed. Decker froze, staring at his fallen companion. Then he looked at Rhett, and for the first time Clara saw something like fear in his eyes. "You're insane," Decker whispered. "Yeah," Rhett said. "I get that a lot." Decker raised his gun, but Rhett was already moving. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, grabbed Decker's wrist, and twisted hard. The gun fired into the air, then clattered to the ground. Rhett's fist slammed into Decker's jaw, snapping his head back. Another punch. Another. Decker hit the ground, blood pouring from his nose. Rhett picked up Decker's gun and aimed it at his head. "Wait!" Decker gasped, hands raised. "Wait, please! Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right now. I can tell Gaines to back off. I can make him stop." "You think I'm stupid?" Rhett's finger tightened on the trigger. "Gaines doesn't stop. Men like him never stop." "Then kill me!" Decker spat blood onto the snow. "Go ahead. But it won't matter. He'll send more. He'll keep sending them until you're dead and she's his. You can't fight him. Nobody can." Rhett stared down at him for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun. "You're right," he said. "I can't fight him." Decker's eyes widened with hope. "But I can make sure he knows the cost." Rhett brought the gun down hard across Decker's temple. The enforcer crumpled, unconscious. Rhett turned and walked back to where Clara sat frozen on the horse, still clutching the rifle. He took it from her hands gently, his expression unreadable. "You should have run," he said quietly. "I know." "You could have been killed." "So could you." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. Then he just nodded and swung up into the saddle behind her. They rode through the pass in silence, leaving the bodies and the unconscious Decker behind in the snow. The trail on the other side was steep and winding, carved into the mountainside like a scar. Clara could feel Rhett's tension in the way he held the reins, the rigid set of his shoulders. He kept glancing back, watching for more riders. "How many men does Gaines have?" Rhett asked after a while. "I don't know. Dozens, maybe." "And how far will he go to get you back?" Clara's voice was small. "As far as it takes." Rhett cursed under his breath. They rode for another hour before the trail finally leveled out. The trees opened up and Clara saw it. A valley, hidden between two massive peaks, blanketed in snow. In the center, surrounded by pines, sat a small cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney. "Home," Rhett said. It wasn't much. The cabin was rough-built, log walls chinked with mud and moss. The roof sagged in places. The windows were small and covered with oiled paper instead of glass, but it was solid, defensible, and it was theirs. Rhett dismounted and helped Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She grabbed his arm to steady herself, and he held her until she found her balance. "Come on," he said. "Let's get inside." The interior of the cabin was sparse. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. Furs and blankets were piled on the bed. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with canned goods and supplies. A rifle hung above the door. It was cold inside, but not as cold as outside. Rhett moved to the fireplace and started building a fire, his movements automatic. Clara stood in the middle of the room, suddenly unsure of what to do with herself. This was her home now. This stranger's cabin, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by men who wanted her dead. "Sit down before you fall down," Rhett said without looking at her. She sank into one of the chairs, watching as he coaxed the fire to life. Flames licked at the kindling, then caught, spreading warmth through the room. "There's food in the pantry," Rhett said, nodding toward the shelves. "Help yourself. I need to see to the horse." He left before she could respond. Clara sat alone in the cabin, listening to the wind howl outside. She should have felt relieved. She should have felt safe. Instead, she just felt numb. She forced herself to stand and search the pantry. There wasn't much. Dried meat, hardtack, a few cans of beans. She found a pot and started heating water, her hands moving on autopilot. By the time Rhett came back inside, she'd managed to put together something resembling a meal. He looked surprised. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I needed to do something." They ate in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against tin plates. The food was bland, but it was warm, and that was enough. When they finished, Rhett leaned back in his chair and studied her. "You did good today," he said. Clara looked up, startled. "I almost got you killed." "You stayed. Most people would have run." "I didn't know what else to do." "Still, took guts." He paused. "You ever fire a gun before today?" She shook her head. "Figured. You held it wrong. Didn't brace for the recoil. You're lucky you didn't break your shoulder." "I'll try to do better next time." There's going to be a next time, Rhett said. Decker's going to wake up and ride straight back to Gaines. When he does, Gaines is going to send more men, better men, and they're not going to stop at the pass. Clara's chest tightened. Then what do we do? We prepare. Rhett stood and walked to the rifle above the door, lifting it down. Starting tomorrow, I'm teaching you how to shoot, how to reload, how to fight. Because when they come, and they will come, I need to know you can hold your own. I don't know if I can do that. You can. You already did. He set the rifle on the table between them, then met her eyes. This land, he said quietly. It's worth fighting for. And I'm not just talking about the claim. There's something here, Clara, something Gaines wants. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, we're going to use it against him. Clara stared at the rifle, then at Rhett. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could have taken your land and left me to die. You didn't owe me anything. No, Rhett agreed. I didn't. Then why? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, because I'm tired of men like Gaines taking whatever they want, and because you deserved better than what you got. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd thought was sealed shut a long time ago. She didn't cry. She wouldn't let herself, but her voice shook when she spoke. Thank you. Rhett just nodded. Then he picked up the rifle and started cleaning it, and Clara watched the firelight play across his scarred hands and wondered what kind of man she'd married. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the valley below, Victor Gaines was already planning his next move. The first 3 days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Rhett would wake before dawn, build up the fire, and disappear outside to check the perimeter. Clara would wake to find him gone and coffee already brewing on the stove. By the time he returned, she'd have something resembling breakfast ready, usually just hardtack softened in hot water with strips of dried venison. They didn't talk much during those early mornings. Rhett seemed to exist in a state of constant vigilance, his eyes always moving, always watching. Clara caught him staring at the tree line more than once, jaw tight, hand resting on the rifle he now carried everywhere. On the fourth morning, he finally spoke over breakfast. Get dressed warm, he said. We're going out. Clara looked up from her tin cup. Where? I need to show you something. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled on the heavy coat he'd given her and followed him outside. The valley was beautiful in the early light, she had to admit. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white, untouched except for the tracks Rhett made during his patrols. The mountains rose on all sides like walls, protecting the valley from the worst of the wind. It was isolated, lonely, but there was something peaceful about it too. Rhett led her away from the cabin, following a trail that wound through the pines. They walked for 20 minutes in silence before the trees opened up, revealing a frozen lake nestled against the base of the northern peak. Clara stopped, staring. The lake was massive, easily 100 yards across, its surface covered in thick ice that gleamed in the morning sun. But it wasn't the size that caught her attention. It was the color. The ice had a strange blue-green tint to it, almost luminescent. And beneath the surface, she could see something, dark shapes, irregular formations that didn't look natural. What is that? She asked. Rhett didn't answer immediately. He walked to the edge of the lake and crouched down, running his hand over the ice. About 6 months ago, I was fishing here, he said. Ice broke under me. I went through, nearly drowned, but while I was under, I saw something in the rocks at the bottom. He stood and pointed to the far end of the lake, where the water met the base of the mountain. There's a vein running through that rock face, he said. Silver. Maybe copper, too. I'm not sure. But it's big. Bigger than anything I've ever seen. Clara's breath caught. You found a silver deposit? More than a deposit. A whole damn mine's worth. Rhett turned to look at her. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured I'd work it eventually, take what I needed and leave the rest. But then Gaines started sniffing around my land. Started making offers to buy it. Low offers. Insulting offers. He knows, Clara said quietly. Yeah, I think he does. Or at least he suspects. Rhett kicked at the ice with his boot. That railroad he's been pushing to build through the territory? The route he proposed goes right through this valley. He claimed it was about connecting the settlements, making travel easier. But there's a dozen better routes that don't involve climbing into the high country. He wants the silver. He wants the whole damn mountain, the silver, the copper, probably timber rights too, and he'll kill anyone who gets in his way. Rhett's expression darkened. Your father's debt wasn't random, Clara. I'd bet everything I own that Gaines set that trap on purpose. Get your father owing money, wait for him to die, then claim you as collateral. Once he had you, he could force you to sign over any land rights you inherited. Clara felt sick. But my father didn't own any land. We rented. You sure about that? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, she didn't know. Her father had been secretive about his business, especially toward the end. There could have been debts she didn't know about, assets she'd never heard of, or claims, old mining claims that might overlap with Rhett's land. If Gaines thinks I have rights to this valley, she said slowly, then marrying you didn't solve the problem. It made it worse. Yeah, Rhett agreed, but now he's got to deal with both of us. So what do we do? Rhett looked out across the frozen lake, his jaw set. We prepare for war, he said, because that's what's coming. They walked back to the cabin in silence. Clara's mind raced, trying to piece together everything she knew about Gaines, everything her father had said in those last months before he died. There had been arguments, late-night visitors, papers her father had burned in the fireplace, ashes still glowing when she woke in the morning. He'd been hiding something. She just didn't know what. Back at the cabin, Rhett pulled out a wooden crate from under the bed and started unpacking weapons. 2 rifles, a shotgun, 3 revolvers, boxes of ammunition, knives, even a small hatchet. Pick one, he said, gesturing to the revolvers. Clara stared at the array of weapons. I don't know which, doesn't matter. Just pick. She reached for the smallest one, a compact revolver with a worn wooden grip. It felt heavy in her hand, awkward. Rhett took it from her, checked the chamber, then handed it back. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire, he said. Hold it with both hands, aim center mass. Don't try for headshots. You're not good enough yet. Encouraging. I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to keep you alive. He spent the next hour teaching her the basics. How to load. How to aim. How to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. She practiced with empty chambers first, getting used to the weight and the motion. Then he took her outside. The first shot nearly knocked her on her back. The sound was deafening, echoing off the mountains. Her hands stung from the recoil. Again, Rhett said. She fired again. Missed the tree he'd pointed to by a good 3 feet. Again. By the 10th shot, her hands were shaking and her ears were ringing. She'd hit the tree exactly once. That's enough for today, Rhett said, taking the revolver from her. You did better than I expected. I hit it once. That's 1 more than 0. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the cabin. Rhett showed her how to bar the door from the inside, how to stack furniture to create cover, where to position herself if someone tried to breach the windows. He was methodical about it, pointing out angles and weak points like he'd done this 100 times before. You were a soldier, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Rhett paused, hammer in hand. Yeah. Where? South. During the war. Which side? He gave her a flat look. Does it matter? I guess not. He went back to hammering boards over the windows, leaving only small gaps to shoot through. I didn't fight because I believed in anything, he said after a while. I fought because I didn't have a choice. And when it was over, I came up here to get away from people who wanted to keep fighting. Turns out you can't run far enough. Clara watched him work, seeing him differently now. The scars on his hands made sense. The way he moved made sense. The coldness in his eyes when he'd faced down Decker made sense. How many men have you killed? She asked quietly. Rhett stopped hammering. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, Enough that I stopped counting. He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. That night, they ate in silence again. Clara had gotten better at cooking over the fire, managing to turn beans and salt pork into something almost edible. Rhett ate without comment, staring into the flames. Tell me about Gaines' operation, he said suddenly. Everything you know. Clara set down her plate. He runs most of it out of a compound about 30 miles south of here. Big house, barracks for his men, warehouses. He's got maybe 40 or 50 people working for him directly. Enforcers, foremen, clerks. Then there's the people he's got on payroll in town. Sheriffs, judges, land office clerks. So he's bought the whole territory. Most of it. Anyone who won't sell or can't be bought gets squeezed out, sometimes violently. And nobody stands up to him? A few tried. They're dead now. Claire's voice dropped. There was a homesteader named Morrison, refused to sell his land. Gaines sent men to convince him. They burned his house down with his family inside, made it look like an accident. Rhett's expression hardened. What about the law? The sheriff works for Gaines. So does the territorial judge. Clara shook her head. There is no law. Not anymore. Just Gaines. Then we can't count on help. No. Rhett stood and walked to the window, peering through the gap in the boards. How long do you think we have? Clara asked. A week. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. He turned to face her. Decker will have made it back by now. He'll tell Gaines what happened. Gaines will regroup, hire more men, and come back with enough firepower to level this valley. Can we hold them off? Depends on how many he sends. And if it's too many? Rhett's jaw tightened. Then we make it cost him everything. The next few days blurred together. Rhett kept Clara on a brutal training schedule. Shooting practice at dawn, hand-to-hand combat in the afternoon, strategy sessions by firelight at night. She learned how to reload under pressure, how to clear a jammed weapon, how to fight dirty when someone got too close. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her muscles ached constantly, but she got better. On the 7th day, she hit 5 targets in a row. Rhett didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. You're ready, he said. For what? Whatever comes next. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed. Rhett had insisted she take it while he slept on the floor near the door and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Her mind kept circling back to the lake, to the silver hidden beneath the ice, to the war that was coming. Rhett? She said quietly. Yeah. She hadn't realized he was still awake. Why didn't you just leave? She asked. When you found the silver, why didn't you take what you could carry and disappear? Start over somewhere else? The floor creaked as he shifted. You ever have something you worked for? Something you built with your own hands? No. Then you wouldn't understand. Clara turned onto her side, facing where he lay in the darkness. Try me. Rhett was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. I spent 10 years wandering after the war, he said, working whatever jobs I could find, logging camps, cattle drives, mining operations. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never wanted to. Then I found this valley, and for the first time since I was a kid, I thought, maybe I could build something here. Something that was mine. Something nobody could take away. But they're trying to take it anyway. Yeah, they always do. He paused. That's why I'm not running, because if I run now, I'll never stop, and I'm tired of running. Clara understood that. She'd been running her whole life, from her father's debts, from Gaines, from the reality of what her life had become. And look where it had gotten her. I'm tired too, she said softly. Then we make our stand here. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under. She woke to Rhett shaking her shoulder, his hand clamped over her mouth. Don't scream, he whispered. We've got company. Clara's heart lurched. She sat up slowly and Rhett removed his hand. He was already dressed, rifle in hand, moving toward the window. How many? She whispered. At least a dozen, maybe more. They're surrounding the cabin. Clara scrambled out of bed, grabbing the revolver from the table. Her hands shook as she checked the chamber. Outside she heard voices. Footsteps in the snow, the creak of leather saddles. Then a voice rang out, loud and clear in the pre-dawn darkness. Rhett Calder, I know you're in there. It wasn't Decker. This voice was smooth, educated, confident. Rhett's expression went ice cold. That's Gaines, he said. He came himself? Yeah, which means he's not taking chances this time. Gaines spoke again. I'm a reasonable man, Calder. I didn't come here to kill you. I came to make a deal. Rhett didn't answer. He just checked his rifle and moved to the other window. I know about the silver, Gaines called. I know what you're sitting on, and I know you can't work it alone, but I can. I've got the equipment, the men, the connections. We could be partners, split it 60-40. You'd be a rich man. Don't trust him, Clara whispered. I don't. Then what do we do? Rhett met her eyes. We fight. He turned toward the door and shouted, I've got a counteroffer, Gaines. You turn around and ride out of this valley, and I let you live. Silence. Then Gaines laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. I gave you a chance, Calder. Remember that. A gunshot shattered one of the windows. Glass and wood exploded inward. Clara dropped to the floor, heart hammering. Stay low, Rhett shouted. More gunfire erupted. Bullets punched through the walls, tore through the door, shredded the furniture. Clara crawled behind the overturned table, pressing herself flat against the floor. Rhett fired back through the window, the rifle's crack deafening in the confined space. Someone outside screamed. Clara, Rhett yelled. The other window! She scrambled to the second window, rising just enough to see outside. 3 men were advancing on that side, using trees for cover. She raised her revolver with shaking hands and fired. The shot went wide, but it made them dive for cover. Again, Rhett shouted. She fired again and again. One of the men staggered, clutching his leg. Good! Rhett reloaded, his movements fast and practiced. Keep them pinned! The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Smoke filled the cabin. Clara's ears rang from the constant gunfire. She fired until her revolver was empty, then fumbled to reload, bullets slipping through her numb fingers. A man tried to rush the door. Rhett shot him through the gap in the boards. Another tried the window. Clara fired point blank, and he fell backward into the snow. But there were too many of them. We can't hold them, Clara shouted. I know. A bottle smashed through the window, trailing flame. It hit the floor and exploded, spreading fire across the wooden planks. They're trying to burn us out, Clara screamed. Rhett grabbed a blanket and started beating at the flames, but more bottles came through, the cabin filled with smoke and heat. We have to run, Clara coughed, eyes streaming. Where? They've got us surrounded. Clara's mind raced. Then she remembered the lake, the silver, the thing Gaines wanted most. The mine, she said. If we destroy it, we destroy what he came for. Rhett stared at her through the smoke. You're talking about collapsing the whole mountain. Can you do it? Yeah, but it'll flood the valley, everything we have. Better than letting him take it. Rhett's jaw worked. Then he nodded. Back door, he said. On 3. They positioned themselves. Rhett kicked the bar free. 1, 2, 3. He threw the door open and fired into the darkness. Men scattered. Clara ran, Rhett right behind her, both of them sprinting for the tree line as bullets kicked up snow around their feet. They made it to the trees. Barely. Behind them, Gaines's voice rose in fury. After them! Don't let them reach the lake! Clara and Rhett ran through the forest, branches whipping at their faces. She could hear men crashing through the undergrowth behind them, shouting, getting closer. They burst out of the trees onto the frozen lake. Keep going, Rhett yelled. They ran across the ice, slipping and sliding. Clara's lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest. Halfway across, Rhett stopped and dropped to his knees. He pulled something from his coat. Dynamite, she realized. He had dynamite. Where did you... Knew this day was coming, he said grimly. He started packing the explosives against the ice near the rock face, working with quick, desperate efficiency. Men emerged from the tree line. 12, 2 more. Rhett, they're coming. Almost done. Bullets struck the ice around them. Clara raised her revolver and fired back, screaming as she pulled the trigger again and again. Rhett lit the fuse. Run, he roared, grabbing her arm. They sprinted back across the lake as the fuse hissed and sparked behind them. Gaines's men were on the ice now, closing in from all sides. Clara's foot broke through a thin patch. She went down hard, icy water soaking her leg. Clara! Rhett hauled her up, half carrying her as they stumbled toward the far shore. Behind them, the dynamite exploded. The sound was apocalyptic. The entire mountain seemed to shake. The ice cracked with a sound like cannon fire, massive fractures spider-webbing outward from the blast point. And then the lake began to collapse. Water erupted through the shattered ice, a massive geyser shooting into the air. The rock face crumbled, and the dam holding back the mountain lake gave way. Thousands of gallons of freezing water roared down into the valley, swallowing everything in its path. Gaines's men screamed as the flood hit them. Some tried to run. None of them made it. The water swept them away like leaves, smashing them against rocks and trees. The roar was deafening. The power was terrifying. Clara and Rhett reached the shore and collapsed, gasping. watching as the valley they'd fought for disappeared beneath a churning wall of water and debris. When the roaring finally stopped, the silence was worse. Clara couldn't feel her legs. She sat at the edge of the ruined valley, soaking wet, watching the water settle into a murky, debris-choked lake that stretched across what had been Rhett's land. Bodies floated face down in the distance. Horses thrashed in the shallows, screaming. The cabin was gone, completely submerged except for a corner of the roof that jutted above the waterline like a gravestone. Rhett stood a few feet away, staring at the devastation with an expression Clara couldn't read. His rifle hung loose in his hand. Blood ran down the side of his face from a cut above his eyebrow. "Is Gaines down there?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse. "Don't know." Rhett wiped blood from his face with the back of his hand. "Didn't see him on the ice." Then he could still be alive. "Yeah." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with everything it meant. If Gaines had survived, this wasn't over. It would never be over. Clara tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She made it halfway up before her knee buckled, and she fell back onto the frozen ground with a grunt of pain. Rhett turned, saw her struggling, and crossed the distance in 2 long strides. He grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet with one hand, holding her steady while she found her balance. "You hurt?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe." Everything hurt. It was hard to tell what was injury and what was just exhaustion and cold. "You?" "I'll live." He let go of her arm but stayed close, ready to catch her if she fell again. Clara looked past him at the flooded valley, trying to process what they'd done. "We destroyed it," she said. "All of it. The silver, the land, everything you worked for." "Yeah. I'm sorry." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Don't be. It was the right call. But it was your home." "It was just a place." He turned away from the water, scanning the tree line. "We need to move. If Gaines is alive, he's going to regroup. And we're sitting targets out here." "Where do we go? The cabin's gone. The supplies are gone. We don't even have—" "I've got a cache," Rhett interrupted. "Half a mile east, up in the rocks. Gear, ammunition, enough food for a few days. I set it up last year in case something like this happened." "You planned for this?" "I planned for someone trying to take what was mine. Didn't matter who." He started walking, limping slightly. "Come on." Clara followed, every step agony. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, already starting to freeze in the mountain air. Her hands were numb. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue and tasted blood. They climbed through the rocks, Rhett moving with practiced efficiency despite his limp. Clara struggled to keep up, slipping on ice, grabbing at branches to keep from falling. Twice she had to stop to catch her breath, and twice Rhett waited without comment, just watching the valley below. The cache was hidden in a narrow crevice between 2 boulders, covered with branches and snow. Rhett cleared it away and pulled out a canvas bag, then another. Inside were blankets, dry clothes, food, ammunition, a second rifle, matches, a small tent. "Get out of those wet clothes," Rhett said, tossing her a bundle. "You'll freeze to death before nightfall." Clara's fingers were too numb to work the buttons on her dress. She fumbled with them, cursing under her breath. Rhett turned his back without being asked, giving her privacy while he unpacked the rest of the supplies. Clara stripped down to her undergarments, peeling off the frozen fabric with shaking hands, then pulled on the dry clothes. Wool pants too big for her, a thick shirt, a coat that smelled like gunpowder and pine. The transformation was immediate. Warmth began creeping back into her limbs. "You can turn around," she said. Rhett glanced at her, nodded once, then started changing his own clothes. Clara looked away, staring out at the valley. The water had stopped rising. It sat there like a wound, reflecting the gray sky. "How long until they come back?" she asked. "Depends on how many survived." Rhett pulled on a dry coat and checked his rifle. "If Gaines made it out, he'll send word to his compound. Get reinforcements. That'll take a day, maybe 2. If he didn't make it out, we've got longer. His people will need time to figure out who's in charge now. And then? Then they'll hunt us. Not for the land anymore. For revenge." Clara turned to look at him. "You think we bought ourselves time or just made it worse?" "Both." Rhett sat down on a flat rock and started loading bullets into his rifle, mechanical and precise. "But we're alive. That's what matters." "For how long?" He didn't answer. They stayed in the rocks until dark, huddled under blankets, watching the valley for signs of movement. Clara dozed fitfully, jerking awake every time the wind shifted or a branch cracked in the distance. Rhett didn't sleep at all. He just sat there, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the flooded valley below. When full dark came, he finally spoke. "We need to know if Gaines is dead." Clara's stomach twisted. "How do we find out?" "We go down there, search the bodies." "That's insane. If anyone's still alive, then we deal with them." Rhett stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "But we can't run blind. We need to know what we're up against." Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. They couldn't spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, never knowing if Gaines was hunting them or rotting at the bottom of the lake. "Fine," she said, "but I'm coming with you." "Clara, I'm coming." Rhett looked at her for a long moment, then just nodded. They descended through the darkness, moving slowly, carefully, using the moonlight to navigate the treacherous slope. The valley looked different now, alien and wrong. The water had receded slightly, leaving a muddy shore littered with debris. Broken trees, shattered equipment, bodies. So many bodies. Clara forced herself to look at them as they searched. Most were enforcers she didn't recognize. Hard men with guns and knives, hired killers who'd made the mistake of following Gaines into the mountains. A few she did recognize from town, men who'd worked for Gaines for years. Decker was among them, face down in the mud, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. But Gaines wasn't there. They searched for an hour, checking every body, looking for the smooth-talking land baron with the expensive clothes and cold eyes. They didn't find him. "He got out," Clara whispered. "He wasn't on the ice when it collapsed." Rhett swore quietly. "Then he's already on his way back to the compound. What do we do?" "We finish this." Rhett turned away from the bodies, his expression grim. "We go to Gaines' compound. We end him before he can rebuild." Clara stared at him. "That's suicide. You said he's got 40 or 50 men there." "He did. We just killed a dozen of his best. Maybe more." Rhett's eyes were hard. "He's wounded. Weak. If we hit him now before he recovers, we might have a chance." "Might? It's better than waiting for him to come back with an army." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say there had to be another way. But she'd seen what Gaines did to people who ran. She'd seen what he did to people who fought back. Running would just delay the inevitable. "All right," she said, "we go after him." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Rhett sorted through the supplies they'd salvaged, dividing ammunition, packing food and water. Clara cleaned and loaded weapons, her hands steadier now, the motions becoming familiar. "We'll need horses," Rhett said. "There should be some that survived the flood. They'll be spooked, but we can track them down." "And then?" "Then we ride south. Stay off the main trails. Hit the compound at dawn when most of his men will be sleeping." "You're talking about a massacre." Rhett looked at her. "I'm talking about survival. This is war, Clara. And in war, you do what you have to do." She held his gaze. "I know." They found 2 horses just after dawn, grazing nervously near the edge of the flood zone. One was a big roan gelding, wild-eyed and skittish. The other was smaller, a gray mare with a white blaze. Both bore Gaines' brand. Rhett approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The roan tried to bolt, but Rhett caught its reins and held firm until the animal calmed. Clara managed to corner the mare, though it took her 3 tries. They rode out of the valley as the sun rose, leaving behind the devastation they'd created. Clara looked back once and saw the flooded valley, the broken trees, the bodies still floating in the water. She didn't look back again. The ride to Gaines's compound took a day and a half of hard travel. They avoided towns, skirted settlements, kept to the high country where the snow was deep and the trails were empty. Rhett pushed them hard, stopping only to rest the horses and refill their canteens from half-frozen streams. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Clara used the silence to think, to plan, to prepare herself for what was coming. She'd killed 2 men at the cabin, maybe 3. She wasn't sure if the one she'd shot in the leg had survived long enough to drown. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, but it didn't hurt the way she thought it would. Maybe that should have scared her. Maybe it would have, a week ago. But a week ago, she'd been a different person. They reached the ridge overlooking Gaines' compound just before midnight on the second day. Rhett reined in his horse and dismounted, gesturing for Clara to do the same. They crawled to the edge of the ridge and looked down. The compound sprawled across a valley floor. A main house, 3 barracks buildings, 2 warehouses, and a scattering of smaller structures. Lights burned in several windows. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but their movements were lazy, routine. They weren't expecting trouble. "How many do you count?" Rhett whispered. Clara studied the compound, counting silhouettes. 10, maybe 12 on patrol. Hard to tell how many are inside. We'll hit the barracks first, set fires, create chaos. When they come out, we pick them off. And Gaines? He'll be in the main house. That's where we finish it. Clara's hands tightened on her rifle. What if he runs? He won't. Men like Gaines don't run. They think they're untouchable. Rhett looked at her. You ready? No? Good. The day you're ready for something like this is the day you've lost your soul. He checked his weapons one last time. Stay close, watch your angles, and if something goes wrong, don't try to be a hero. Just run. I'm not leaving you. Clara, I'm not. She met his eyes. We started this together. We finish it together. Rhett stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They moved down the ridge in silence, using the darkness and the terrain for cover. The guards were positioned poorly, too far apart, focused on the wrong approaches. Rhett took the first one silently, slipping up behind him and cutting his throat before the man could make a sound. Clara watched from the shadows, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give them away. They reached the first barracks without being spotted. Rhett pulled out a bottle of kerosene from his pack and started splashing it against the wooden walls. Clara did the same on the other side of the building, her hand shaking as she poured. Rhett struck a match. The building went up like kindling. Flames roared into the night sky, and within seconds men were screaming inside. They stumbled out, coughing, disoriented, some of them on fire. Rhett and Clara opened fire from the darkness. The first volley dropped 4 men before they even knew what was happening. The rest scattered, diving for cover, shouting for reinforcements. More guards poured out of the other barracks, some armed, some still pulling on their boots. Chaos erupted. Clara fired methodically, reloading when her rifle clicked empty, switching to her revolver when she ran out of ammunition. Men fell. Some got back up. Some didn't. The second barracks caught fire. Then the third. The compound was an inferno now, flames leaping into the sky, smoke choking the air. Men ran in all directions, some fighting, some just trying to escape. Clara lost track of how many shots she fired. Her ears rang from the constant gunfire. Her eyes burned from the smoke. Through it all, she kept moving, kept firing, kept fighting. A man rushed her from the side. She didn't see him until he was almost on top of her. She swung her rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw. He went down hard, and she shot him before he could get back up. "Clara!" Rhett's voice cut through the chaos. "The house!" She turned and saw him running toward the main building, rifle in hand. She followed, vaulting over a fallen timber, dodging bullets that kicked up dirt at her feet. The front door of the main house hung open. Rhett went through first, Clara right behind him. Inside was dark, lit only by the glow of the fires outside. Expensive furniture, paintings on the walls, a chandelier that probably cost more than Clara had earned in her entire life. And at the far end of the room, standing behind a massive oak desk, was Victor Gaines. He looked smaller than Clara remembered, older. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, measuring the threat. "Calder," he said calmly. "I should have known." Rhett raised his rifle. "It's over, Gaines." "Is it?" Gaines gestured to the window, where flames lit up the night. "You've destroyed my compound, killed my men. Congratulations. You've won the battle." "Sounds like the end to me." "No." Gaines smiled. It was a terrible smile. "This is just the beginning. I've got investors in 3 territories, partners in the capital. You think killing me stops anything? Someone else will come, someone worse, and they'll finish what I started." "Then they can try." Rhett's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wait." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I want to know something first." Gaines turned his cold eyes on her. "The debtor's daughter, still alive. How disappointing." "My father," Clara said. "Did you kill him?" Gaines tilted his head, considering. "Does it matter?" Yes. Then yes, I had him killed. He was about to go to the territorial governor, tell him about the land fraud, the forced sales, everything. I couldn't allow that. He said it like he was discussing the weather. A bit of poison in his whiskey made it look like his heart gave out. Very tidy. Clara's hand dropped to her revolver. Don't, Gaines said. Killing me makes you a murderer. Makes you know better than me. I'm already a murderer, Clara said quietly. I've killed 6 men in the last week. Maybe more. What's one more? She drew and fired. The shot took Gaines in the chest. He staggered back, eyes wide with shock, hand pressed to the spreading red stain on his shirt. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. He fell backward over his chair and didn't move again. Clara stood there, revolver still raised, staring at the body of the man who'd destroyed her life. She felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just a cold, empty certainty that it was done. Rhett stepped beside her, gently lowering her gun hand. We need to go, he said quietly. This place is going to burn to the ground. They walked out of the house together, leaving Gaines's body behind. Outside, the compound was a hellscape. Everything was burning. The few surviving guards had fled into the darkness. No one tried to stop them as they made their way back to the horses. They rode away as the main house caught fire, flames consuming everything Gaines had built. By dawn, they were miles away, climbing back into the mountains. Clara's whole body ached. She was covered in soot and blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Rhett finally stopped the horses near a stream and dismounted. Clara followed, her legs barely holding her up. Is it over? She asked. Rhett looked back the way they'd come, where smoke still rose into the morning sky. For now, he said. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth. They knelt by the stream and washed the blood from their hands in silence, and watched the sun rise over the mountains, and tried to figure out what came next. The water ran red between Clara's fingers, then pink, then clear. She scrubbed at her hands until the skin was raw, watching the blood disappear into the stream. Beside her, Rhett did the same, methodical and silent, his face carved from stone. When her hands were finally clean, Clara sat back on her heels and stared at them. They looked the same as they had a week ago. Same calluses, same scars from kitchen work and mending clothes. But they'd pulled a trigger and ended a man's life, and that changed something fundamental that she couldn't quite name. You all right? Rhett asked. Clara looked at him. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes, a fresh cut across his cheekbone, still weeping blood. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 2 days. I don't know, she said honestly. Are you? No. The admission hung between them. Clara appreciated it more than any lie would have been worth. I killed him, she said. Gaines! I just pulled the trigger. I know. I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe. Or guilt. Satisfaction? Something. Clara's voice cracked. But I don't feel anything at all. Just empty. Rhett wiped his hands on his pants and leaned back against a rock, wincing as the movement pulled at what was probably a cracked rib. Give it time. It'll hit you eventually, usually when you're trying to sleep, or when you're doing something ordinary like cooking or washing dishes. That's when your brain finally stops running and lets the rest catch up. Does it get easier? No. You just get used to carrying it. He looked at her directly. But here's what nobody tells you. You don't have to carry it alone. Clara met his eyes and saw something there that made her chest tighten. Understanding, shared weight. The kind of connection that only came from walking through fire together and coming out the other side changed, but alive. My father used to say that violence only breeds more violence, she said quietly. That it never solves anything. That the only way to break the cycle was to refuse to participate. Your father was wrong, Rhett said bluntly. Sometimes violence is the only language some people understand. Gaines wasn't going to stop because you asked nicely. He wasn't going to have a change of heart or see the error of his ways. Men like that, they only stop when they're forced to stop, when someone finally stands up and says no more and backs it up with action. And now he's dead and we're alive, and the world keeps turning like none of it mattered. It mattered, Rhett said firmly. Every person Gaines would have hurt if we hadn't stopped him. It mattered to them. Every homesteader he would have driven off their land, every woman he would have claimed as payment for debt, every family he would have destroyed to get what he wanted. We stopped that. We ended it. Clara pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. What happens now? Do we just go back? Pretend none of this happened? We can't go back to the valley. It's underwater. Everything I built is gone. I know. I mean, where do we go? What do we do? We can't just wander forever. Rhett was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was testing the words before committing to them. There's a settlement about 3 days north of here, small, quiet, far enough from Gaines territory that his partners won't know to look for us there. They need people willing to work, build things, start over. You've been there? Once. A few years back, before I found the valley. He glanced at her. It's not much. Frontier settlement, hard life. But it's honest work. And they don't ask too many questions about where people come from. We could disappear there. Build something new. We, Clara repeated softly. Rhett's jaw tightened. Unless you want to go your own way, I'd understand. This marriage, it was a transaction, a deal to keep you alive and give me legal claim to the land. The land's gone now and Gaines is dead. You don't owe me anything. You're free to leave if that's what you want. Clara studied his face. This mountain of a man who'd killed for her, bled for her, destroyed his own land to protect her. She thought about the last week, the fear, the violence, the terrible intimacy of fighting side by side and watching each other's backs. She thought about the way he'd taught her to shoot without condescension, the way he'd given her the only warm blanket in the cave, the way he'd looked at her not as property or a burden, but as a partner. I don't want to go my own way, she said. Rhett's eyes snapped to hers, something vulnerable flashing across his face before he could hide it. I don't know what this is, Clara continued, this marriage, this partnership, whatever we're calling it. But I know I'm not ready for it to end. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Not quite relief, but something close to it, something that looked almost like hope. All right, he said. Then we go north. Together. They rested for an hour, eating dried meat and hardtack from Rhett's pack, letting the horses drink their fill from the stream. Clara's body screamed for sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames, bodies floating in dark water, Gaines falling backward with her bullet in his chest, the surprise in his eyes as he realized he wasn't untouchable after all. She forced her eyes open and focused on the present, on the cold mountain air, on the sound of water over rocks, on Rhett checking and rechecking his weapons with practiced efficiency, making sure they were clean and loaded and ready for whatever came next. Can I ask you something? She said. Rhett looked up from cleaning his rifle. Yeah. That night in the saloon. When I asked you to kill the men hunting me, why did you say yes? The real reason, not the one about defending what's yours. He set down the rifle and considered the question, his expression thoughtful. Honestly? Honestly. Because I saw someone who'd been beaten down her whole life, used and hurt and treated like property, and she was still standing, still fighting, still willing to make a deal with a dangerous stranger just to survive another day. He met her eyes. That takes real strength, Clara. The kind of strength most people don't have. And I figured anyone with that much fight in them deserved a chance to use it for something other than just surviving. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen solid for longer than she could remember. I thought you just needed a wife to keep your land, she said, her voice rough. I did. But I could have picked any desperate woman in that saloon, could have made the same offer to a dozen others and gotten the same result. Rhett's expression softened slightly. I picked you because you didn't ask me to save you. You asked me to help you save yourself. You wanted a weapon, not a savior. There's a difference. Clara had to look away. The weight of his words was too much to carry while looking him in the eye. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me as more than just another victim, for treating me like I had something to offer besides just existing. Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You were never just a victim, Clara. You were a survivor. And there's a hell of a difference between the two. They rode north as the sun climbed higher, leaving the burned compound and the flooded valley behind. The mountains stretched ahead of them, endless and indifferent to human struggles. And for the first time in longer than Clara could remember, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. It was a fragile thing. tentative. But it was there. The journey north was hard but uneventful. They avoided settlements, traveled by night when they could, kept to the high country where fewer people ventured and questions were even fewer. Rhett hunted when they needed food, rabbit, squirrel, once a young deer that provided meat for 3 days. Clara learned how to skin a rabbit without flinching, how to cure meat over a fire, how to read the land for water and shelter. They slept in shifts, never both at the same time, always watching for signs of pursuit. But no one came. Either Gaines' remaining people were too scattered to mount a search, or they decided that hunting 2 people into the high mountains wasn't worth the effort. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and saw the settlement spread out in the valley below. It was small, like Rhett had said. Maybe 30 buildings clustered around a central square, smoke rising from chimneys, livestock penned near the edge of town. Fields stretched out beyond the buildings, some already plowed for spring planting. It looked peaceful, ordinary, normal. It looked like a place where 2 people could disappear and start over. "That's it?" Clara asked. "That's it, Pine Ridge." "What's it like?" "Quiet, hardworking. They've got a general store, a blacksmith, a few other trades. Most people are homesteaders working land claims around the valley. Government's still offering free land under the Homestead Act if you're willing to work it." "And you think they'll accept us? 2 strangers with no history and blood on our hands?" "Out here, everyone's got blood on their hands one way or another. Indian wars, claim disputes, survival. Long as we work hard and don't cause trouble, they won't ask too many questions about where we came from or what we left behind." They rode into Pine Ridge just before sunset. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. A pair of trail-worn travelers on tired horses, armed and alert, clearly coming from somewhere dangerous. Clara felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging, wondering. But no one challenged them. No one reached for weapons or shouted accusations. They were just strangers. And in a frontier settlement, strangers pass through all the time. Rhett led them to a building at the edge of the square, a general store with a faded sign that read, "Fletcher's Provisions and Supplies." They dismounted, tied the horses to the rail, and went inside. The store was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with goods that ranged from practical necessities to random oddities someone had probably traded for food. An older woman stood behind the counter, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, watching them with the kind of attention that missed nothing. "Help you?" she asked. "We're looking for work," Rhett said, "and land if there's any available for claim." The woman's eyes flicked between them, taking in their weapons, their worn clothes, the way they stood close but not touching, the exhaustion etched into their faces. "You married?" "Yes, ma'am." "Got papers?" Rhett pulled the marriage certificate from his coat and handed it over. The woman studied it carefully, lips pursed in thought. "Calder," she read aloud. "You related to the Calders who used to run cattle up near Widow's Peak?" "Distant cousin," Rhett lied smoothly. "Haven't seen them in years, lost track during the war." The woman handed back the certificate, seeming satisfied. "Well, we've got land available. Government's offering 160 acres per married couple under the Homestead Act. You'll need to file a claim at the land office, build a dwelling, work the land for 5 years. After that, it's yours free and clear. No rent, no mortgage, no one can take it from you." "What kind of work is available?" Clara asked, finding her voice. "Depends on what you can do. We need hands for timber work, farming, building. Always need someone willing to hunt and trap. We supply meat to the mining settlements downriver, and they pay good money. You any good with a rifle?" Clara glanced at Rhett. "I'm learning." "Good enough. My husband's been looking for someone to help with the hunting contracts. Pays decent, and you can work your own schedule around building your homestead." She pulled out a ledger and a pencil. "Names? Rhett and Clara Calder." The woman wrote it down in careful script. "I'm Margaret Fletcher. I run this store with my husband, Tom. You need supplies. You come here. You need advice. You ask. You cause trouble. You leave. That clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am," Rhett said. Margaret nodded, satisfied. "Land office is across the square. Miller's the name. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you sorted with a claim. You'll need to mark your boundaries within the week and start building within the month. Winter comes early up here, so you'll want walls and a roof before the snow." They filed their claim that evening with Mr. Miller, a thin man with ink-stained fingers who asked no questions beyond the legal requirements. He showed them a map of available parcels and let them choose. 160 acres of timbered land on the western edge of the valley, far enough from town to have privacy, but close enough to walk for supplies and trade. The land wasn't much to look at. Still wild and overgrown, never been cleared or worked. But it had water from a clear stream, good timber for building, and soil that looked like it might support crops if they worked it right. It was a start. A real start. They spent the first week camped on the land in a tent borrowed from Margaret, clearing brush and marking boundaries with cairns of stacked stones. Rhett worked like a man possessed, cutting timber from dawn to dusk, hauling logs and stones for a foundation. Clara helped where she could, though her hands blistered and her back ached constantly from the unfamiliar labor. At night, they sat by the fire and talked. Really talked, for the first time since they'd met. Clara told him about her childhood, about her mother who died of fever when she was 10, about her father's slow descent into gambling and debt, and the desperate choices that had followed. Rhett told her about the war, about the friends he'd lost at places with names like Shiloh and Antietam, about the years he'd spent drifting afterward trying to find something worth staying for. They didn't talk about gains, they didn't talk about the men they'd killed or the compound burning or the valley flooding. That weight was there between them, heavy and constant, but they carried it in silence because some things were too raw to touch yet. On the 8th day, Rhett started building the cabin. It was slow work with just the two of them, but he had experience from building the one in the valley, and Clara was a fast learner. The walls went up log by log, each one notched and fitted with careful precision. The roof took shape from split timber and pine boughs. Windows were cut and fitted with real glass that Margaret sold them at cost, probably because she liked them and wanted them to stay. By the end of the 3rd week, they had 4 walls, a roof, and a door that actually closed and could be barred from inside. The floor was still packed dirt, and the chinking between the logs needed work. But it was shelter. Real shelter. A home. Clara stood in the doorway on the first night they slept inside, looking at the space they'd created with their own hands, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Real, honest pride in something she'd built. "It's not the valley," Rhett said from behind her, and she could hear the loss in his voice. "No," Clara agreed, turning to look at him. "It's better." He looked at her, surprised and maybe a little confused. "The valley was yours," Clara explained. "Something you built alone, something you defended alone. This—" She gestured to the cabin around them, rough and imperfect but solid. "This is ours. We built it together, and that makes it worth more." Something shifted in Rhett's expression, the hard edges that he always carried softening just slightly, letting her see the man underneath the armor. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess it is." Winter set in hard and fast, like it always did in the high country. The snow came in thick, heavy blankets that buried the valley and turned the world white and silent. Clara and Rhett settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, hunting in the mornings when the weather allowed, working on improvements to the cabin in the afternoons, huddling close to the fire at night while wind howled outside. They learned each other's patterns and habits. Rhett was an early riser, always up before dawn, unable to sleep once the first gray light touched the sky. Clara was quieter in the mornings, needing coffee and silence before she could face conversation. He was methodical and precise in everything he did, measuring twice and cutting once, planning every step. She was more intuitive, working on instinct and feel, making adjustments as she went. They argued sometimes about how to build the chicken coop they were planning for spring, about whether to trade for a milk cow or goats, about 100 small things that didn't really matter in the grand scheme. But the arguments never lasted long and never cut deep. They'd learned the hard way that life was too short and too hard to waste energy on grudges. Margaret and Tom Fletcher became regular visitors, bringing supplies and gossip from town, staying for dinner and conversation. A young couple named Daniel and Sarah started homesteading the land adjacent to theirs, and the 4 of them would share meals and trade labor, helping each other with projects too big for 2 people alone. No one asked too many questions about where they'd come from or what had brought them to Pine Ridge. Out here, the past was something people left behind, and the future was something you built with your own 2 hands and whatever help your neighbors could spare. One night about 6 weeks after they'd arrived, Clara woke to find Rhett sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with an expression she'd learned meant he was thinking about things he didn't want to talk about. She could tell by the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his knees, that he was back in the valley in his mind, thinking about everything they'd lost. She got up quietly, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the cold, and sat down beside him on the floor. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "Never could. Not really. Not for long. You want to talk about it?" Rhett was quiet for a long time, just staring at the fire. Then he said, "I destroyed 10 years of work in 30 seconds. Blew it all up without a second thought, buried it under a lake where no one can ever reach it. And I keep wondering if I made the right choice. If there was another way I didn't see. You saved our lives. I know. But sometimes I wake up and wonder what would have happened if I'd just fought them off, held the cabin longer, found a way to defend it without destroying everything." "You would have died," Clara said bluntly. "We both would have. There were too many of them, and they weren't going to stop. Gaines wanted that silver bad enough to kill for it, and he had the men and resources to keep coming until he got it, or we were dead." "Maybe, but not maybe. Definitely." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You made the only choice you could, Rhett, and because of that choice, we're here, alive, building something new instead of rotting at the bottom of that lake with Gaines' men. Something smaller, something worth less. Something ours," Clara corrected firmly. "The valley was beautiful. I saw it for 3 days before we flooded it, and it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. But it was also lonely, isolated, and it almost got us killed. This place," she gestured to the cabin around them, small and rough but warm. "This place is ours, together. Built with our hands, defended with our choices. And that's worth more than all the silver in the world." Rhett looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Something vulnerable and uncertain and raw. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "This. Have a partner. Build a life with someone else and share decisions and space and everything." His voice dropped even lower. "I've been alone for so long, Clara. Since before the war ended. I don't know how to be anything else. Don't know how to let someone in." Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough and calloused, scarred from a lifetime of hard work and harder choices. "Then we figure it out together," she said. "Neither of us knows what we're doing. I've never been in a real partnership before. Just transactions and debts and people taking from me. But we're still here, still fighting, still choosing to stay. That's got to count for something." Rhett's hand tightened around hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely let show. "You could do better than this, than me. You're free now. Gaines is dead, his organization's broken. You've got legal papers proving you're your own person. You could go anywhere, be anything." "I could," Clara agreed, "but I don't want to. Because here's what I've learned. Freedom isn't about having infinite choices. It's about having the power to choose what matters to you and then fighting to keep it. And you matter to me, Rhett Calder. This partnership, this life we're building, this cabin that's too cold in winter and probably too hot in summer, it all matters to me, more than anything else ever has." Something broke in Rhett's expression, some last wall he'd been holding up finally crumbling. He pulled her close, not rough, but desperate, like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. They sat there in silence, holding each other while the fire burned down to embers, and Clara felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't even known was displaced. A sense of rightness, of home. Not the building around them, but the person beside her and the choice to stay. Spring came slowly to Pine Ridge, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown earth and the first green shoots of new growth. Clara planted a garden in the cleared space behind the cabin, working the soil with her hands, coaxing life from the ground with seeds Margaret had sold her. Tomatoes, beans, squash, herbs. Things that would feed them through the next winter if she could keep them alive. Rhett built a fence to keep out deer and rabbits, then expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper stone chimney to replace the temporary one they'd built in haste. The work was hard and constant, but it was also satisfying in a way Clara had never experienced before. Every improvement they made was theirs. Every seed that sprouted was because of her care. Every log that went up was because of their effort. The settlement began to feel like home in a way nowhere ever had before. They made friends, cautious at first, keeping their past close and their stories vague, but genuine once they realized no one was going to pry. Margaret and Tom became regular visitors, bringing supplies and staying for meals, treating them like family. Daniel and Sarah, the young couple on the adjacent land, became close companions, sharing labor and resources, and the occasional bottle of whiskey when the work was done. No one asked too many questions about where they'd come from or what had driven them to Pine Ridge. Out here, the past was something people left behind, buried under hard work and new beginnings, and the future was something you built with your own two hands and whatever help your neighbors could spare. One evening in late spring, Clara was working in the garden, pulling weeds and checking for pests, when she heard hoofbeats on the trail. She looked up to see a rider approaching, a well-dressed man on a fine horse, clearly not from the settlement. His clothes were too clean, his saddle too expensive, his bearing too formal. Her hand instinctively went to the revolver she now wore on her hip, a habit Rhett had insisted on and she'd learned to appreciate. Rhett appeared from the side of the cabin where he'd been working on the fence, rifle in hand, his expression immediately hard and wary. The rider pulled up short, about 20 feet away, hands raised in a clear gesture of peace and non-aggression. "Rhett Calder?" he called out. "Who's asking?" Rhett's voice was cold, the rifle not quite pointed at the stranger but close enough to be a threat. "My name is William Brennan. I'm a land surveyor and claims investigator for the territorial government." He pulled a document from his saddlebag slowly, making sure his movements were visible and non-threatening. "I've been trying to track you down for months, Mr. Calder. You're a difficult man to find." "I like it that way. What do you want?" "Just to talk." "May I dismount?" Rhett and Clara exchanged glances. Clara gave a slight nod and Rhett lowered the rifle fractionally. "Slowly," Rhett said. Brennan dismounted with exaggerated care, keeping his hands visible. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and the kind of face that suggested he spent more time with paperwork than people. Not a threat, Clara judged, but potentially bringing trouble anyway. "Your claim on the land near Widow's Peak," Brennan said, holding out the document. "The valley that flooded last winter. There's been significant legal complications regarding that land." Clara's stomach dropped. Of course there were complications. There were always complications. "What kind of complications?" she asked, stepping forward to stand beside Rhett. Brennan looked between them, then seemed to make a decision. After Victor Gaines died in the flood, the territorial government seized all his assets as part of a criminal investigation. Land holdings, equipment, outstanding claims, financial records. During the audit, we discovered extensive fraud. Gaines had been using forged deeds and intimidation to claim land that wasn't legally his, including— He paused, looking at Rhett directly. "Including your valley, Mr. Calder." "My claim was legal," Rhett said coldly. "Filed proper, worked the land, met all requirements. It was completely legal, which means Gaines's subsequent claim was fraudulent. He had no legal right to try to force you off that land or to the resources beneath it." Brennan held out the document. "The government is issuing you a settlement, Mr. Calder. Compensation for the land you lost, the resources destroyed, and the difficulties you endured at Gaines' hands." Rhett stared at the document like it might be a snake. Clara stepped forward and took it, reading quickly while her heart pounded. Her eyes widened as she processed the numbers. "This is real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Completely legal and binding. Signed by the territorial governor himself and countersigned by the federal land office." Brennan's expression softened slightly. "It seems you're a wealthy man, Mr. Calder. The settlement comes to just over $23,000. Not as much as that silver deposit was worth if you'd been able to mine it, but substantial nonetheless. Enough to buy this homestead outright, expand your holdings significantly, live comfortably for years." Clara looked at Rhett, whose face had gone completely blank. She knew that expression. It was the one he wore when he was processing something too big to show reaction to. "We don't want it," Rhett said. Clara blinked. Brennan looked stunned. "What?" they both said simultaneously. "I said we don't want it." Rhett's voice was firm, decisive. "Keep the money. Use it to compensate the other people Gaines hurt, the families he destroyed, the homesteaders he drove off their land, the people who lost everything because of his greed. They need it more than we do." Brennan stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Mr. Calder, this is over $20,000. Do you understand what you could do with that much money? You could buy half this settlement, build a real house, hire help, never have to worry about—" I know what I could do with it, Rhett interrupted, and I'm telling you to give it to someone who needs it more than we do. Find the family's gains destroyed and make them whole. That's what that money should be used for. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, sudden and unexpected. She stepped close to Rhett and took his hand, squeezing tight. Are you sure? She asked quietly, giving him one last chance to reconsider. He looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him in that saloon, he smiled. Really smiled, open and genuine and reaching his eyes. I'm sure, he said. We've got everything we need right here. Brennan stood there for a long moment, clearly struggling to process what he was hearing. People didn't turn down $20,000. Not in this territory. Not anywhere. You're serious, he finally said. Dead serious. But why? Rhett looked at the cabin behind them, at the garden Clara had planted, at the land they'd cleared with their own hands. Because that money came from blood and greed and everything we left behind, he said. It's tainted with Gaines and his crimes and all the pain he caused. And I don't want to build our life on that foundation. I want to build it on this. He gestured to the cabin, the garden, the fence, the land they'd cleared. On work we did ourselves, on choices we made together, on something clean and honest and ours. That's worth more than any settlement. Brennan looked at him for a long moment, then at Clara, then back at Rhett. Slowly, something like respect crossed his face. You're a good man, Mr. Calder, he said quietly. The territory needs more people like you, like both of you. He carefully folded the document and tucked it back into his saddlebag. I'll make sure the money goes where it should. The family's gains hurt. There are quite a few of them, from what we've found in his records. This will help them rebuild. Good, Rhett said. Brennan mounted his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, the investigation cleared you both of any wrongdoing in Gaines' death. It was ruled self-defense and justifiable homicide given the circumstances. You're not wanted for anything. You're free and clear. Clara felt a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. Brennan tipped his hat to them both and rode away, disappearing down the trail toward town. Clara and Rhett stood there in the fading light, hand in hand, watching him go. You know we really could have used that money, Clara said after a long silence. Yeah, I know. Built a bigger cabin, bought more land, hired help, made things so much easier. I know. Then why did you turn it down? Rhett turned to face her fully, both hands taking hers now. Because I've learned something these past few months, he said. The things worth having are the things you build yourself. The valley was beautiful, and that silver would have made me rich, but I was alone there. Building it alone, defending it alone, living there alone. It was mine, but it was empty. He squeezed her hands. This, what we're building here. It's smaller and harder, and we'll probably struggle some winters, but it's ours together, and that makes it worth more than all the silver in all the mountains. Clara felt tears spill over, running down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. How did I get so lucky? She asked, her voice breaking. Rhett's laugh was rough but genuine. Lucky? You married a stranger in a desperate bargain, got dragged into a war, nearly died a dozen times, and ended up in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a half-built cabin and a man who barely knows how to talk about his feelings. Exactly, Clara said fiercely. I could have ended up with someone who only saw me as property, as a transaction, as something to be owned and used. Instead, I got you, a man who sees me as a partner, as an equal, as someone worth fighting beside, not just fighting for. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Rhett's expression softened in a way she'd rarely seen. Clara, I mean it. That night in the saloon, I thought I was trading one prison for another. A different kind of cage with different bars, but still a cage. But you gave me something I never had before, real choice, real freedom, a life that's actually mine to live. She stepped closer. Ours to live. Ours, Rhett agreed quietly, and then he kissed her. It was different from the few brief kisses they'd shared before. Longer, deeper, full of everything they'd survived and everything they were choosing to build. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the sun had set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. The cabin stood behind them, solid and real, built by their hands and their will. The garden stretched out to the side, green shoots pushing through dark earth, promising food and life. The land around them was theirs, legally and truly, something no one could take away as long as they worked it and defended it. "You know what the funny thing is?" Clara said, leaning against Rhett's chest. "Gaines wanted the silver so badly he killed for it, destroyed lives for it, died for it, built his whole empire on greed and violence and taking what wasn't his. And in the end, it's buried at the bottom of a lake where no one can ever touch it. All that death and destruction for nothing." "Not for nothing," Rhett said. "It brought us together, led us here. Sometimes the things we think we want aren't what we need. And what do we need?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw everything they'd survived reflected in his eyes. "This," he said simply. "Each other. This land. This life. It's not easy, and it's not rich, and it's probably going to be hard as hell some years, but it's honest. It's ours, and that's enough." Clara smiled, genuine and full. "Yeah, it is." They walked back to the cabin together, hand in hand, and Clara realized with startling clarity that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for her whole life without even knowing she needed it. Not safety, though that mattered. Not security, though that helped. Not wealth or status or any of the things people usually wanted, but choice. Real choice. The freedom to build a life on her own terms, with someone who saw her as an equal partner rather than property. The strength that came from surviving hell together and choosing to stay anyway. The quiet satisfaction of working hard and seeing the results of that work take shape in wood and stone and growing things. The cabin door closed behind them, shutting out the cold mountain night. Inside, Rhett built up the fire while Clara started preparing dinner from their supplies. It was a simple meal, beans and salt pork and bread she'd learned to bake in their small oven, but they ate it together at the table Rhett had built, and it tasted better than any fancy meal ever had. That night, lying in the bed they'd built together in the room they'd constructed with their own hands, Clara listened to Rhett's breathing slow